A game developer with no games is like an author with no books. By the end, you'll know the 2 reasons why you aren't making games and why you should even care as a beginner. So before I tell you the 2 reasons, like why should we even care? If you are a beginner, why should you even care about making your first game right now? And just let me tell you, there are so many people that spend way more than like a few months just preparing for their first game. Like they are just learning for like months and months. I was doing it for years, but since you aren't like 100% conscious that your goal should be to finish your first game, you're barely making any progress toward this, and you're just making the process much longer than it actually needs to be. When you finish your first game, you have something to show and that you can be proud of. So when you, for example, tell your friends or family that you are a game developer or you do game development as a hobby, instead of just saying that and having nothing other than like a tutorial project to show, when you actually made your first game, you can actually show that game. Like you have something to show, even though it might be bad since it's your first game, you got something to show and it's going to be much better than nothing. Like your self-identity just changes. And also when you just finish a game, you learn so many other things that you would never have learned if you never made like a full game that you actually released. Like for example, you learn so many things about planning, time management, like motivation, marketing. Like there can be so many other things that you never would learn if you just made like experiments, followed tutorials, or prototyping forever. Like we can do these things initially to learn, but not forever. And just finishing your first game, that's going to be the hardest barrier for your game development journey. Just finishing your first game, it's going to be the hardest thing. Once you have done that, you can basically do whatever you want, unless you use like AI or tutorials, things like that. If you actually made the game yourself. And that's exactly why I made Smartini, because I know how important your first game is. So let's talk more about that. So having your first game as your #1 priority is going to give you massive benefits, and it's going to get you on the right track to becoming a actual game developer with a released game. So for you right now as a beginner, there are going to be 2 possible scenarios for your skill and your learning. The first scenario, like just be conscious of which one you are in. The first scenario is going to be that you're actively building things, you are experimenting, and when you can experiment, like they make bigger experiments basically, then you are making prototypes and reusable systems that you can make in your first game, and you're using building as your main learning resource. That's maybe going to be 10% of you. Is that you? Yes or no? The second scenario is going to be where you're watching tutorials, you are over-reliant on AI, and you aren't like building things as your main learning resource. And that's going to be maybe 90% of you guys, because tutorial hell is such a big problem in game development. And I faced this too. Like for years I was stuck in tutorial hell, where I was just constantly watching tutorials and I wasn't building anything myself, and I was just wasting so much time because I never learned anything. Because the reason why tutorials aren't effective is that what tutorial teaches you is recognition but not understanding. You can imagine it's like watching a painter paint and then expecting to like learn painting solely about that. Like sure, you can learn to recognize like what they are doing in the moment, but when I give you a canvas, you aren't going to be able to paint like nearly as good as the painter that you watched. Because when you watch them, you just recognize what they were doing, you didn't understand it like thoroughly. And especially in game development, which is like 100 fields in one, and problem solving is also such like a key skill to know in game development. We can't like recognize and remember all problems in the entire world. We need practical understanding to actually get better at solving problems, like the skill of problem solving. And since it's so dynamic, like game development is so many things, you aren't like making something that someone else has done before. So the only way to learn game development is by actually getting practical understanding. And when you're watching a tutorial, what are you getting? Well, you're getting recognition about something. Whilst to actually use something practically, like in your own game, what we need is not recognition. What we need is understanding. Like we need to thoroughly understand something. And that only comes from actually building. So that's the first reason, lack of skill. But there is also like one other reason that might not be that relevant for you right now, but it's going to save you tons and tons of time, because with 90% likelihood, you are going to encounter this like in some way or another when you are on your path to finishing your first game. So let's talk about that. It's perfectionism. And this can be more specifically like when you think that your first game is going to be so bad that no one is going to play it. So you just think, well, what's the point anyway, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to make it because it's going to be bad. But that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like, obviously, when you do something for the first time, it's going to be bad. And you might be thinking, well, I'm just going to make prototypes and experiments all the way until I'm a good game developer and I can make good games. But remember what we talked about before. I said when you finish your first game, or like you finish a game in general, you learn so many things that you would never learn from just experiments and prototypes alone, because there are two completely different things. Like a full game, like a full meal, and just cutting onions, which is just one part of making a meal, are two completely different things. Like, to become a good chef, you need to make full meals. To become a good painter, you need to make full paintings. You can't just make parts of a painting or parts of a meal forever. You need to make the whole thing, because it's a whole nother thing to make like the entire craft than to just make like an isolated part of it. So perfectionism, that's very stupid. Let's just say that. But I'm going to be honest, like, I'm not going to lie to you. Yes, it's going to be bad. My first game, also horrible game, but you learn so many other different things from it. Like, my second game was 10 times better. Still not awesome, but it's 10 times better. And the third game I'm working on right now, I learned so many other different things. I've also learned to scope down. So my third game is going to be like a bit of a smaller mobile game. I'm going to release it. I'm going to market it much better. And I know what the core game loop is going to be like. I know how to make it fun. All these things. The third one is going to be awesome. And I couldn't have done that if I didn't like make bad first and second games. Like, I wouldn't be able to, because I wouldn't be able to learn the things that I needed to make a good third game. So you might be asking, how do we apply this perfectionism thing practically, or not apply it? What we're going to do is that we aren't going to polish things in our first or second game, because they're going to be small games. We don't want to make like a huge game for our first project. Our first game is going to be like tiny, so don't focus on making it perfect, polishing it, like making the UI look perfect, making the movement system like 100% flawless. Don't focus on these things. Just make something that works and learn the essential things that you need to, like how to make like a fun core game loop. So just focus on the main core mechanics itself, and then release the game, and then just move on. Don't like focus on perfecting the game itself, and also don't delay the process of actually making the game. So that's obvious. But also things like this, like specific things to actually preparing and making your first game, like all the mistakes you can make. I talk a lot more about that inside of Smartini in a lot more detail. So if you want access to that, then it's the first link in the description. But either way, let's talk about the action step I want you to do for this video. So a general like rule of thumb to remember is that when you are making like a project or your first game, more specifically in this case, your first game, you should know and understand like roughly 80% of the things that you're making in the game, and the rest of the 20% that can be things that you are like learning for the first time. Roughly 80%, that's the sweet spot for like it not being too hard, but also not being too easy. And if you aren't at that point where you understand roughly 80% of the things that you need to make a game, what you're going to do is that you are going to make these experiments and these prototypes that I talked about before, and you're not going to use AI, like over rely on AI. You're not going to use tutorials and guides. You're going to experiment yourself and struggle with the things. Your point isn't to like make them, it's to learn. So make experiments, then expand into making prototypes, preferably something that you can reuse in your full game, all the way until you know roughly 80% of the things that you need to make your first game, and then just make your first game immediately. Also, don't use AI and tutorials for your first game. The goal is still to learn. Measure productivity in things that you built and things that you tested. So that's a good rule of thumb. But that's everything I had for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope this helped you a ton. Thank you for watching.